Another NFL season has come and gone, and with it, at the end, the Kansas City Chiefs once again hoist the Lombardi Trophy. Congrats to them on a job well done. Looking at how the season went as a whole though, there were some ups and downs for sure, but I'd argue there were a lot more downs than there were ups. It felt like, compared to the last few years, that the level of play went down. There was mistake-ridden football everywhere you looked. Every single team had sloppy moments at some point throughout the year. There was a lot of injuries, quarterback play wasn't as good. It was just a strange year in football. With how eventful this season was, now is the time to do some reflection. In today's video, I'm going to grade and review how I believe every single NFL team did in the 2023-2024 season. I really hope you enjoy. Let's start off with the Arizona Cardinals. I mean, a 4-win season is nothing to celebrate, but at the same time, they definitely played above expectations this year. The Cardinals on paper were seen as this team who would be lucky to win more than 1 or 2 games this year. They were a common consensus number 32 or 31 placement in the power rankings. We all thought they'd be absolutely garbage, and while their record wasn't very good, they actually were very competitive in a good number of their matches this year. Be it with Kyler Murray or with Joshua Dobbs, they pulled off a couple of upsets here and there, and in some cases they even made some pretty good teams sweat. This team was able to surpass their limits, and after a year that could have gone a lot worse than it really should have, they are now in a situation where they have the number 4 pick in the NFL draft and have a great opportunity to give Kyler Murray another weapon and make this team even more talented in the long-term future. Not a great year by any means, but honestly, I can't even be that mad about this. Grade D+. The Atlanta Falcons. So, honestly, I am somewhat impressed with this Falcons team for being in contention to win their division this entire year, when clearly they were never that talented to begin with, but at the same time, you can make a strong argument that they definitely should have won their division this year, and have gotten another 2 to 3 wins on their resume potentially. It's their own fault for shooting themselves in the foot constantly with incompetence with their coaching, consistently misutilizing their talent, and having a quarterback nightmare situation. Starting Desmond Ridder, having him throw games away left and right, it was just a disaster in all shapes and forms, when it really felt like Atlanta could have been more. Not to mention, they had one of the easiest strengths of schedule in the NFL to take advantage of, and they still couldn't walk away with more than 7 wins. I feel let down, but also not that surprised at the same time. It feels like there's room to develop this with a better coach and with a new quarterback in place potentially, but looking at this year, I really can't give them anything higher than a C-. The Baltimore Ravens. This Ravens team had a good bit to prove this year, and they did about as much as you could aside from getting to the big game. Lamar had to justify his new contract. He had to stay healthy. They had to not choke away big games and blow leads like we saw the year prior. We had to see a bunch of players step up, and everything kind of fell in line for them after about the midway point in the year. They were excellent in all shapes and forms. Their defense became elite, arguably the best unit in the league. They got to the AFC Championship game. They had the best record in the NFL. They did almost everything right, except for winning when it really mattered against the Kansas City Chiefs. And I can't fault them too much, as I don't think a lot of people expected them to be in the Super Bowl at the start of this year anyway. I know I sure as hell didn't. I didn't even think they were winning their own division. But here they are, being one of the best teams in the league, and having a pretty bright future ahead of themselves with that defense and the development of Zay Flowers and having Lamar under contract still. I can't even be that mad about how this year went. I'm disappointed they couldn't get to the Super Bowl. It felt like this was a great chance to, but overall, good year from Baltimore. I'm proud of those guys, and I'm happy to give them an A- grade. The Buffalo Bills. Oh man, this is where failing to get to the big game actually matters a bit more compared to a Baltimore team that was just starting to figure it out. This Bills team has been ready to win for years now, and once again, in crunch time, they couldn't get it done. They lost to Mahomes again, they choked away another golden opportunity to get to the Super Bowl, and now we're sitting here wondering what the heck is next. And if you ask any Buffalo fan, they're going to tell you that anything that happened during the season doesn't even matter. Even if it was impressive, the fact that they couldn't get to the Super Bowl yet again is the only thing that's going to be on their minds. However, I do want to give the Bills a little bit of credit for their regular season. As a whole, they showed a lot of resilience as a group. There were a lot of moments where it felt like they were down and out. We were questioning if they'd even make the playoffs, but when it truly mattered, they stepped up. They clutched it out, they went on a big winning streak, and won a playoff game. This Buffalo team showed me they have the resilience to keep moving forward, and that kind of stuff matters in a season, so I'm going to give them a couple extra points and say they get a B grade. The Carolina Panthers. Oh, yeah, well, to be honest with you, I don't even know what to say about these guys. Somehow, some way, they were even worse than they were supposed to be in the first year of a rebuild. How they managed to surpass their expectations in the worst way possible is mind-boggling. I mean, this team won 2 games, and with how ugly they were, it doesn't even feel like they won anything. And let's not forget how horrible Bryce Young was in his first year. That offense was atrocious levels of bad. He couldn't throw accurately in a check down situation. He had absolutely no confidence on this team, not to mention very little help as well with a bad offensive line. It was just a nightmare on that side of the ball through and through. Somehow being worse than some of these teams with like second, third string quarterbacks. And it's not even like they can help improve their team with a good draft pick. They traded it away to the Bears. Their poor performance ends up benefiting only Chicago. They have the top pick in the draft, and now they're going to be the ones selecting a quarterback that's probably going to be better than the one that you traded up for just 1 year ago. With the type of season they had, I can't think of any other grade to give them than an F. They were literally losers in every way humanly possible. Just pathetic. The Chicago Bears. This one's kind of a strange year. It started off in the most disastrous way possible. Justin Fields was crap at the beginning, then he gets hurt. It seems like all hope is lost. But then all of a sudden, they turn it up in the second half of the year. They're in playoff contention suddenly. Their defense takes a major step forward. Justin Fields and the offense starts to click. And of course, they really ended up benefiting from that DJ Moore trade, as he looks like a true bona fide number 1 superstar that could help them for years to come. Now, some people definitely took the preseason hype with this group way too far, saying Fields might even be an MVP candidate and Bears talking mad trash. But hey, I think in normal people's eyes, they ended up playing around their potential, if not maybe even a little bit higher, which is kind of a new thing for Bears fans these days. That's not something we're used to saying at all. And the fact that they were able to get the number 1 pick in the draft while still trying their butts off to improve is just a major added benefit on top of it. I'm seeing some improvements, the picture's starting to settle, and they could get their franchise quarterback now. All in all, could have been a better year, but it could have been a lot worse. So just knowing what they won at the end of the day, I'll say C+. The Cincinnati Bengals. I mean, just knowing the window they're looking at right now and trying to get back to the Super Bowl, not even making the AFC Championship bare minimum is going to be seen as a failure for these guys. But I would say that they just got very unlucky and that they probably would have been in the race if they did end up being on the side of Lady Luck. The whole Joe Burrow injury situation was horrible. They're one of the biggest teams to be affected by that quarterback injury bug that was spreading like wildfire this year. We saw early in the year how they played poorly when Joe Burrow was playing through that injury, and then later on when he went down for the entire year. But even so, even during all of the bad parts of the year, they managed to stay afloat, be a competitive team, and show a lot of resilience as a team. When they had absolutely no hope with Joe Burrow going down with that injury, they were able to rally behind Jake Browning, win a bunch of games, and still be in playoff contention. They didn't get there in the end, but the fact that they were still there goes to show me that if this group is healthy, that they're still more than capable of making a Super Bowl run. So Bengals fans, it was a letdown, but if you guys can get healthy, I wouldn't be too worried. Grade C-. The Cleveland Browns. What a story these guys turned out to be. I myself didn't have a lot of faith in this group heading into the regular season. I thought they were a bit overrated, but their talent really shined through, and they proved me wrong. And what's so great about this group is they had every reason to not be good, but they still managed to fight. They showed more resilience than any other team in the league, arguably. They had 4, 5 different starting quarterbacks, and they still managed to make the playoffs, and win 11 games. They had one of the best defenses in the league, the defensive player of the year in Myles Garrett, a special comeback story in Joe Flacco, and they won a lot of close games on top of it too. They're a clutch group with a bright future if they can figure out their quarterback situation. I am genuinely impressed with how this Browns team did as well as they did, knowing all of the adversity in their way. I will gladly give them a B+. The Dallas Cowboys. I mean, on the surface, not a horrible year if you look at it from a general standpoint. Dak Prescott for a while was putting up MVP numbers. CeeDee Lamb arguably cemented himself as like a top 3 wide receiver in the game right now. A lot of stuff went right for the Cowboys, but at the end of the day, this season's going to be seen as a failure. Just like with Buffalo, anything that's not making the conference championship or the Super Bowl is a major letdown. Being a good regular season team means absolutely nothing, and it's something that nobody is going to remember. This Cowboys team ended up being fraudulent. They took advantage of the weak teams on their schedule, lit up the scoreboard there, then laid eggs against actual opponents. And I can't even think of a more sad way to go out than to lose to that Packers team the way they did at home. It's one thing that this is only the beginning of your rebuild with a franchise quarterback, but they've been doing this for like 8 years now, so there's no excuse at this point. I'll give Dallas a B. The Denver Broncos. Denver's season was up and down. It started off where it felt like they were absolutely trashed and they had no chance of being a good team this year, but then they kind of found that mid-season form, so to speak. Their defense showed a massive step up. Their offense looked more consistent. Russell Wilson definitely played better compared to last year statistically, but then they had a major fall off towards the end, and in general, they did leave a bunch of winnable games on the board, like in Week 1 against Vegas and that New England game, just to name a couple of examples. And on top of it, they had that drama with Russell Wilson, and they're now left in a situation where their future is very uncertain. They need to find their new franchise quarterback, and this season generally didn't accomplish much of anything at all. They still feel like they're in the exact same spot as last year, but with a different quarterback moving forward. So, all in all, they showed some good resilience in that they're not going to lay down, but they didn't win as many games as they should have, so I'll go right in the middle with a C grade. The Detroit Lions. This was supposed to be the stepping stone year for the Lions. They went from bad to competitive and just on the cusp of playoffs to now needing to take that next step. And needless to say, they did it with relative ease. Going from a 9-win team that's scrappy to a division winner, a 12-win squad, and making it all the way to the NFC Championship game. And they damn near made it to the Super Bowl if it weren't for a colossal choke. And I'd argue they did pretty well in a lot of different aspects. Their offense was explosive. Amon-Ra St. Brown was excellent. Their run game was really sick. Sam Laporta and Jahmyr Gibbs emerged as star players on that side of the ball. Defensively, they need some work, but Aiden Hutchinson continues to get better, which is a great sign. And now the only thing left to answer for this Lions team is if they can do this on a consistent basis. If you want to separate yourselves from the good teams and be one of the great ones, that's what it takes. Doing this more than just 1 or 2 times. We got to see the Lions take that next and final step to really prove themselves. And I look forward to seeing if they can do it, because as of right now, with how they're playing, they have a very bright future ahead of themselves. Season grade, A-. The Green Bay Packers. The Pack definitely surprised your boy this year. I thought they were okay. They still had a lot of the pieces from the Rodgers era that made them talented, but there were so many questions about how they'd do with a new QB. Could they get as lucky as they did with Rodgers taking over for Favre back in the day? And they definitely got that boost. They ended up making the playoffs, which certainly took me off guard, and they even won a playoff game, upsetting Dallas, and they damn near beat the San Francisco 49ers to make it to the NFC Championship game, all in Jordan Love's first season as a starter. You can't draw up a better start even if you tried. This was supposed to be the rebuilding year to see what this kid can do, and he thrived under the pressure. There were a couple of not so great moments during the middle to early portions of the season, but this group really buckled down and they played their hearts out and got better over time. Jordan Love had a great year statistically, and there's so much room for him to continue to get better from here. So I'll be excited to see what the Packers can do. The fact that they accomplished so much in just 1 year under a new starter is an excellent way to start off this new era. Grade, B+. The Houston Texans. If you want to talk about overachieving, look no further than the Houston Texans, man. A team that was commonly seen as one of the worst teams in the NFL ended up not just making the playoffs and winning their division, but winning a playoff game and being competitive against the top-seeded Baltimore Ravens for about one half of football. This Texans team was flashy. They were exciting. They were competitive. They pulled off major upsets. And most importantly, they found their franchise quarterback. CJ Stroud has emerged as one of the most exciting young players in recent memory. Just the fact that they've lucked out so well with him so far is a big enough W on its own, but the fact that the team around him was able to be elevated so much because of his play, and we saw the emergence of guys like Will Anderson and Tank Dell and Nico Collins, is all just great signs for the Texans heading into the future. They already won their division in their first year of what's supposed to be a rebuild. If Stroud can continue to develop his game and get better over time like he clearly can, then who knows just how far this team can actually go. The Texans did so much better than I thought they would, with a rookie coach and a rookie QB. They weren't supposed to have the talent to compete at this level, so the fact that they're so far ahead of schedule right now in a year where they were supposed to suck makes me believe they definitely deserve an A- grade for the year. Speaking of overachieving low-tier AFC South teams, how about the Indianapolis Colts? Another team that really caught me off guard and I assumed would be one of the worst teams in the NFL this year ended up having a pretty fun up and down year where they too were almost able to win the AFC South. Just like one play away arguably, which is pretty damn impressive for a team that was supposed to be garbage. Moving on to a brand new quarterback, Jonathan Taylor being out wanting a contract extension and all that, and their ownership making everything an absolute nightmare. It seemed like this Colts team was set up for failure, but at the end of the day, their talent won out. They were able to get JT back in there, and they were able to show some exciting QB play, both out of Gardner Minshew and their rookie Anthony Richardson. Now, health is going to be a big question about this kid moving forward, but the fact that he showed flashes is a really good sign for the Colts. They have something to build off here after overachieving the way they did. They too are way ahead of schedule and should feel proud of how they played. Season grade B. If you want to talk about a team on the opposite side of the spectrum, though, look no further than the Jacksonville Jaguars. This was supposed to be the year where they cemented themselves as the kings of the AFC South for the long-term future. They were the easy favorites to win this division. This was supposed to be a one-team race, and for a while it seemed like that was going to be the exact case. They started the year like 8-3, they were on top of the world, but then they managed to drop 5 of their final 6 games to have one of the biggest implosions in recent memory, to not only miss the playoffs, but have their season end in complete and utter failure. Definitely not all their faults. They were very unlucky, as Trevor Lawrence could not get healthy for the life of him this year. He was dealing with nagging injuries basically from start to finish, which ruined his performance, and playing through those only made things harder. But at the same time, I have to admit, they did show some regressions in some aspects and some disappointment, like with bringing in Calvin Ridley and him being not that productive, and the offense not really finding much of a rhythm in general, having a lot of games where they just took the day off and were super cold. All that stuff adds up and makes it so even if you were cold to end the year, you probably still could have made the playoffs anyway, but due to those inconsistencies and all the injuries, this season was nothing more than a failure. Grade D+. The Kansas City Chiefs. Let's talk about them Super Bowl champions, shall we? So, the Kansas City Chiefs had a pretty interesting year that really taught me a lot about their character over there. And it's all because of the fact that they struggled for a long time this year. They could not put it together. Even though their defense was good, their offense was so atrocious. They were seen as incredibly vulnerable, they weren't being taken seriously, and this was supposed to be the year where they were going to get knocked out and not get to the Super Bowl. You had Kadarius Toney throwing away games left and right, no real talent at the wide receiver position, and a Patrick Mahomes that has looked more frustrated than I've ever seen him in his career. And in spite of all of that, despite having everything in the world against them, they still won it all. It goes to show the type of character this franchise has, and that they really are the next dynasty of the NFL. This is the least talented Chiefs offense by far in the Patrick Mahomes era, and he was still able to be clutch when he needed to. Just imagine next year when they afford him some kind of help at the wide receiver position and Rashee Rice gets a little better. this team's going to be terrifying, and it's all because they have a ridiculous foundation, not only with their franchise quarterback and their head coach, but with a defense that is quickly developing into a scary unit. They were one of the best in the league this year. They had an extremely impressive playoff run, and they're so young. That's what makes them have so much promise over there right now. That secondary of theirs that dominated the league, a lot of those star players are only like second or third year players. Realistically, they can only get even stronger as they learn more from these experiences and get more confident. With a star defensive unit potentially for years to come, alongside an offense that can realistically only get better, the Chiefs have arguably one of the brightest futures in the NFL, all while putting up a ridiculous year where they overcame a lot of adversity and still hoisted up the trophy in the end. After doing all that they did, they've got to have an A+ grade. Nobody else can match them. It's one hell of a year. The Vegas Raiders, they had a pretty weird year where I have mixed feelings. On one hand, I felt like their year was rather bland. They went 8-9, they were never meant to be taken that seriously, you knew they were never going to make the playoffs, but at the same time, they were able to do some productive things and play better than most people thought they would, so this year was not totally lost. Just by firing Josh McDaniels and finding a good coach in Antonio Pierce, the Raiders were technically able to win this season. And I mean, 8 wins is 8 wins. That's a lot more than I thought they'd get. If they can find their quarterback and they can give Antonio Pierce the keys and let him figure out the regime full time, they might have a decent future ahead of themselves. This could have been a better year, but I think it could have been a lot worse. So let's meet in the middle and say C. The LA Chargers. Talk about a letdown of a year, continuing to spiral down out of control after managing to choke the way they did against the Jaguars in the playoffs 1 year prior. I mean, jeez, man. They just could not get out of their own way. So many horrible things going on. Keeping their head coach for another season when he needed to get out of there. Justin Herbert getting injured. Losing a bunch of heartbreaking games that were incredibly close. The Chargers just were not meant to succeed this year. Their defense was still very, very bad, even though Khalil Mack played a lot better. Their offensive line couldn't protect Justin Herbert, leading to his injury. They didn't have any great receiver help outside of Keenan Allen. Austin Eckler took a major step back. In pretty much every way you can think of, this Charger season was a major failure and a huge step back compared to 1 year prior where they finally made the playoffs under Justin Herbert. Any year the Chargers aren't competitive or in the playoff race is a failure and a waste of Justin Herbert's prime. I'm praying that now that they have Jim Harbaugh there and they have the number 5 overall pick to give him some more help, that they'll finally turn the corner. But just knowing how this year went with all of the unluckiness and the sloppy play, I gotta give them a D. The LA Rams. Well, color me impressed, Rams. You guys played way above your expectations, and you were able to make something out of a bunch of nothing. Without your top picks, you were still able to find some talented young guys in Kyron Williams and Puka Nacua to help you out and boost this team. Matt Stafford was able to turn back the clock and looked like he wasn't even injured at all anymore. You had Aaron Donald make his return and play more games. Things just seemingly went so well for a Rams team that felt like they were going to be a dead husk of a team for years to come after trading away their soul to win a Super Bowl. Knowing what they accomplished and how little faith was put into this group, I'd say that they deserve a season performance grade of B. The Miami Dolphins. This was a very important year for the Dolphins in terms of Tua and his health. They needed him to come through and stay on the field to unleash their full potential, and to a great extent, he was able to do so. They kept him on his feet, he avoided any major traumatic injuries, he threw for a ton of yards, Tyreek Hill was able to dominate alongside Jalen Waddle, they showed some great power running with Mostert amongst all those other guys in that committee. The Dolphins offense was high-flying, and they were very exciting. Now, it was a pretty disappointing end to their year with how they choked away the AFC East, and how they lost to the Chiefs kind of in a sad state in the playoffs. But overall, there's not much to complain about. This was like the first big, important step for them. Season grade, B. The Minnesota Vikings. They finally crashed back down to earth after a wild 2022 season where things went their way constantly. This time around, absolutely nothing went their way, and they had to find ways to get through the storm. And for the most part, I feel they did. It's disappointing to see them not make the playoffs this go-around, but this group faced a lot of adversity and still managed to win a decent number of games and be in the playoff race. This go-around, a lot of the matches weren't bouncing their way that were close. They had significant injuries, with Kirk Cousins going down for the year, and Justin Jefferson missing most of this season. And even so, they were able to find other guys to step up and play through that adversity, with Josh Dobbs being a temporary leader, and with Jordan Addison stepping up in Justin Jefferson's absence, and the defense showing major improvements compared to 1 year prior. This Vikings team showed me fight, they showed grit, and that they're not going to just rely on dumb luck to win games. If anything, the opposite was in effect. God put a hex on these guys. They did not want them to win at all cost, and they were still able to navigate the storm and be a pretty respectable team this year. The fact that they did so much with so little makes me pretty excited for what could happen in the years to come, and I look forward to seeing how much more stable they could be if Kirk Cousins is able to make a full recovery. Grade C. The New England Patriots. You know, I would say I feel bad, Pats fans, but that'd just be a lie. After all the success that you guys had throughout the years, it's your time to suck. And boy, were you guys really, really bad, especially on offense. Historic levels of terrible. This Pats team was completely and utterly lost. Mac Jones lost the locker room. He got replaced by Bailey Zappi. Now they have no future with their current quarterback regime. Their defense got hurt early on in the year, and they just couldn't move the ball to save their lives. This Pats team was absolutely pathetic, and that's in spite of the defense still playing well enough to keep them in a bunch of games. Man, it was just pathetic. They were so boring, so lifeless, and it has resulted in Bill Belichick losing his job and not having one going into 2024, which is absolutely wild, by the way. All in all, this was a failure of a year for the Patriots. It's good that it finally happened to open up their eyes, but man, this was as bad as it possibly could have been. They played even worse than expected. They're lucky the Panthers exist, though. Season grade, D-. The New Orleans Saints. If you want to talk about a team that simply existed, these are your guys. The Saints were better than okay. I mean, they went 9-8 and almost won their division technically, but in my opinion, they should have ran away with this division on paper. It felt like they had the best team in terms of talent, but they could just never string it together, and it was for a variety of reasons, starting with the inconsistency on offense. They could never connect the dots on that side of the ball, it felt like. Something always felt off, where they'd always leave points on the board or make games a lot harder than they needed to be. A lot of games that they won and or lost were just so much closer than they should have been to begin with, and it's all because of those inconsistencies and that failure to get on the same page with each other. And that has to do with Derek Carr not playing his greatest, but also dealing with injuries at the same time. I'm disappointed with how the Saints played. They did good enough to be in playoff contention, but I still felt like I wanted a lot more out of this group. I feel like Derek Carr and these guys can be better. I'm sad with how this year went. This should have been their division for the taking, and the fact that it's not is kind of a failure. Just a mid team that nobody really cared about. Grade C. The New York Giants. I'll just say it straight up. My football team sucked this year. A lot of people were of the belief they'd see a step back and they wouldn't be a playoff team this year, myself included. They were able to take advantage of an easy schedule last year, and this year things were a lot harder. But it goes so far beyond that in terms of the failures and some of the regressions that I saw with this team. The expectation is still to be on the cusp of being a playoff level team, to still be competitive, and for a while this year, that was just not the case. You think about the coaching drama and the loss of belief in Brian Daboll, or the fact that the offense took such a huge regression as a unit. Their offensive line was literally one of the worst in NFL history. Daniel Jones looked a lot worse. He got injured again, showing that he probably should not be the franchise quarterback for these guys. It's disappointing to see them go from a team that made the divisional round to being a 6-win team that's watching the playoffs from home. Although I will say, there were some redeeming qualities about this Giants team that made the season not as bad as it could have been. Their defense got a lot better. Kayvon Thibodeau showed improvement. They were able to be one of the league leaders in turnovers. Bobby Okereke ended up being a great pickup for them. Dexter Lawrence and McKinney were great. And even the offense started to show some life. Once Daniel Jones went down, we saw the rise of Tommy DeVito. Tyrod Taylor had a couple of good games too. I'm still seeing the flashes with this team. I'm still seeing the talent. A team that could be led by Brian Daboll if they can maybe find their franchise quarterback and improve that offensive line. I saw some fight, and that's a lot better than a couple of other really terrible teams this year. But even so, with how they regressed, can't go any higher than a D+ grade. The New York Jets. I mean, they didn't play horribly when you look at their record and everything, but just knowing what this season was supposed to be, it should be seen as a complete and utter failure. It's not all their fault, it's football. Aaron Rodgers had a freak accident and everything, but still. They were supposed to take that leap up. They finally had their QB alongside the defense and the young talented playmakers on offense, and it ended after like 4 plays. Think about that. Their season ended after like 4 freaking snaps with Aaron Rodgers at the helm. That is so sad to see the Jets go out that way. It's such a disappointing, pathetic year to have to suffer through Zach Wilson one last time and questioning if Aaron Rodgers will even be okay heading into next year as he's about to turn 40 years old. But hey, at least it wasn't all gloom and doom over for New York, as we were able to see a couple of upset victories from these guys. They won some big games against some great teams with a defense that had some excellent performances, and it makes you think that if they have a good quarterback there, they can win even more of those matches. We saw the return of Breece Hall. He looked great again after his ACL injury. The Jets have some promise, but it is all sadly going to depend on one man. For now, though, Jets fans can just relax and hope that things go better next year. Grade C-. The Philadelphia Eagles. Yeah, my Super Bowl pick is not looking too good anymore, is it? This implosion is absolutely insane. This Eagles team was stacked beyond belief with talent. They had an excellent start to the year. They started 10-1 and were looking like prime candidates to make it to the NFC Championship, if not the Super Bowl. They were seen as one of the best teams in the league, and then boom. Overnight, everything just goes to hell and they freaking suck. Clearly, this group had a bunch of locker room issues. We heard rumblings about it all year. Their offense was extremely one-dimensional, not nearly as strong as 1 year prior. And of course, their defense. It regressed so heavily. The pass rush wasn't nearly as good. And the secondary was god-awful. They could not defend against the pass if their lives depended on it. The Eagles have some work to do. But the good news is that they still have the foundation to be a very strong and competitive team that can compete for a Super Bowl. They just have to fix these issues and not let this horrible season go to their heads. And for the sake of Eagles fans, I pray that this ends up being a learning lesson for your guys and it lights a fire under them moving forward. Regardless though, this was a sad season to watch and y'all should feel very embarrassed. Grade C. The Pittsburgh Steelers. This might be the most perplexing team of the 2023-2024 year. The Steelers somehow won 10 games and made the playoffs. Preseason expectations were somewhat high for these guys, but I don't think anybody saw them making the playoffs in the manner that they did. It wasn't because their offense improved and their defense was dominant. This was just classic Steelers BS. If anything, their offense was way below average because of Kenny Pickett being god-awful and having Matt Canada as their offensive coordinator, but also their defense was only like middle of the pack statistically. It felt like nothing went right for the Steelers team, and yet they somehow made it to the playoffs regardless. Regardless of how you feel about them being a trash, boring team, they still did show progression technically compared to last year. They won an additional game, and they somehow made the playoffs. Progress is progress, right? They have a lot of challenges ahead of them, but I can't really hate on them too much for doing better than 1 year prior, even though it didn't feel like it. Grade B-. The San Francisco 49ers. Yeah, I know this probably hurts Niners fans. You don't want to think about your team right now, but let's give these boys some flowers, as this San Francisco team in the preseason had some pretty high expectations. There was a bunch of pressure on them to perform, and most importantly of all, a bunch of their players were talking trash, saying that they probably would have made the Super Bowl last year if Brock Purdy did not get hurt. Those are some big words to back up, and through it all, they were able to do so, as they were consistently the best team in the NFC especially after the Eagles had that fall off and were never the same. They were the clear frontrunners for like a good half, if not even more, of the 2023 year. There were question marks on if Brock Purdy could really be the guy, and he answered that with an emphatic yes. He's not that superstar top-tier QB, but he showed both in the playoffs and in the regular season that he can keep up and he can go toe-to-toe with some of the best. And that's on top of so many other all-pro caliber players who emerged with your linebacking core. And with Debo, Ayuk, George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey, this 49ers team is loaded from top to bottom, and they still have room to not only improve, but get right back into the big dance next year. I know it's disappointing because this team feels like it's in win-now mode, but this was a pretty important step for y'all. This Niners team has what it takes. In my opinion, this year was a success outside of not hoisting that Lombardi trophy. Season grade, A. The Seattle Seahawks. I'm disappointed in the Hawks. I had somewhat high expectations for them this year. I thought they were going to make the playoffs again, for sure. They had the talent. They kind of got better during the offseason by drafting Jackson Smith and Jigba. Geno Smith, it seemed like there was a lot of hype around him, but it just wasn't meant to be. They weren't that same team. Teams figured them out, and they dealt with major injuries with Kenneth Walker and with Geno Smith as well from time to time. It just was not that same feeling. The same magic did not exist with the Seattle team. Not to mention it felt like they were kind of choke artists. They lost a couple of games they definitely shouldn't have, while also somehow winning some it felt like they shouldn't have. Just a strange year overall for the Hawks. They were able to go above 500, which is cool, but with how old Geno already is and with Pete Carroll already gone, I don't know what comes next for the Seahawks. It seemed like this was a very important year for them, and they flatlined. Grade C. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Another very exciting story from the 2023 season that was quite unexpected. The Bucs, it felt like, were going to be on the bottom half of the standings. They weren't going to be in contention to win the AFC South, and they'd be lucky to win more than like 4, 5, 6 games. But what we got instead was a team that showed a lot of grit throughout this year, some big-time determination, and a team that was able to stick around until the very end to win the NFC South and win a playoff game on top of it, and even look competitive against the Lions to get close to the NFC Championship game. And this is on the back of a rebuild, technically. Well, a retooling process, I guess I should say. The first year without Tom Brady, you don't know what to expect, and they got more than what they bargained for Baker Mayfield. They decided to take a shot on this guy. There were a lot of rumblings during the preseason that he looked terrible, but we saw a completely different guy in the regular season. He revitalized his career in 2023, having arguably his best season to date. The Bucs gave this guy a chance, and now they're in a situation where they might have their quarterback for years to come, while still having the talent to compete and be a playoff team. This was an excellent and very successful year. Grade B+. The Tennessee Titans. You know, with how this team was shaping up, it seemed like we were kind of at the end. I think most fans expected them to not be that great, and they certainly took that major step backward, going from arguably the best team in the AFC South last year to literally at the very bottom, winning just 6 games. From the perspective of age, it clearly felt that some of their guys were ready to be on their way out. Ryan Tannehill's getting older, wasn't the guy anymore. It was all about just playing through this one last year with him. They were clearly ready to move on from Mike Vrabel, even if I think that's not the best idea. It was time to get rid of the old and see what the new had to offer. And clearly, they have a lot of work to do. This wasn't supposed to be a pleasant year. The Titans were who exactly they were supposed to be, so I can't fault them that much. It was sad to watch this, but you gotta start somewhere if you want to have a successful rebuild, so I'll give them a grade of D+. And finally, team number 32, the Washington Commanders. If you want to talk about disaster, oh man, your first year under new ownership goes about as poorly as it possibly could have, if not somehow even worse. You thought maybe you had something with Sam Howell. He showed you some flashes during that one game against the Cowboys last year, and he even started off okay this year, throwing for a lot of yards, having some competitive matches early on, almost beating the Eagles a couple of times, but then once they lost to the Giants, it was kind of like, yeah, these guys are doomed, aren't they? They start trading away everything, and it's clear that they're just going to look towards the future. The season ends up going very poorly the rest of the way through. They win little to no games. They have Jacoby Brissett come in. They lose all all confidence in Sam Howell immediately, and now you don't know what the hell is going to happen. Their defense was one of the worst in the league. They got rid of their premier pass rushers, so they need to improve there. They need to find their franchise quarterback. They have a stadium that needs renovations. Pretty much everything went poorly for this Commanders team when it felt like they probably should have been at least a little better than this. Now, luckily, because they were so bad, they're in a situation where maybe they can draft their guy for the future. But who knows if that's going to work out in their favor. The Commanders have a lot of work to do. I'll give the Washington Commanders a final season grade of a D-. And that is what I would give every team for a grade based off of how I thought they did in the 2023 season. Let me know what you think down in the comments below and what you would give a letter grade for each of these teams. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give this a like and subscribe to the channel if you're new for more NFL content.